The Navy of the United States of America has evolved significantly since its inception. Beginning as a mixed fleet of wooden warships and armed merchant vessels in 1775, the U.S. Navy of today is a world-class armada fielding battleships, submarines, aircraft carriers, and countless smaller ships. But between the distant past and the present, the Navy experienced great technological leaps thanks in no small part to the Industrial Revolution. Among the better examples of this evolution in seafaring was the Ironclad. The product of an awkward transitionary period between wooden sailing ships and steel battleships, ironclads would be put to extensive use by both Union and Confederate navies during the American Civil War, whether in ocean blockades or as support in riverborne operations. But before they were adopted en masse, they were battle-tested in the waters outside Norfolk, Virginia, in the Battle of Hampton Roads. In this video, we will watch the Confederate CSS Virginia face off against the Union's USS Monitor in an engagement that would change the face of naval warfare. The dawn of the American ironclad began, fittingly enough, with the beginning of the Civil War itself. Shortly after the outbreak of hostilities at Fort Sumter on April 12, 1861, President Abraham Lincoln ordered a naval blockade around the secessionist states, depriving them of the ability to trade with foreign powers. The threat this blockade posed to the newborn Confederacy was existential, as their economy was heavily reliant on the export of southern cotton to markets in Europe and elsewhere. However, the rebel navy possessed very few warships at this early stage of the conflict, and a notoriously slow pace of southern industry meant that the Confederates had to rely primarily on commandeering Union vessels. It was a frustrating problem to which the Confederate Secretary of the Navy, Stephen Mallory, had a novel solution to: the Ironclad. Essentially a wooden vessel encased in iron plating, Mallory proposed that this experimental type of warship would be both innovative and cost-effective, stating, "Not only does economy but naval success dictate the wisdom and expediency of fighting iron against wood." While the Confederacy had the option of purchasing pre-made ironclads from Britain or France, the cheaper and faster alternative would have been to simply build their own models from existing ships at home. It wouldn't be long before Mallory would get a chance to test his theory. With the secession of Virginia on April 27th, the rebels were granted a golden opportunity to seize control of the shipbuilding and repair facilities at the Gosport Naval Yard in Portsmouth. The yard's commander, Commodore Charles Macaulay, had chosen to abandon his position and deny it to the enemy, ordering the entire yard to be burned to the ground, its vessels scuttled, and its cannons spiked. Only the USS Cumberland was evacuated to Fort Monroe, where the Commodore and his loyalists would regroup. But in his rush to destroy Gosport, the dry dock was left intact, along with the lower half of the USS Merrimack. With the Virginia State Militia capturing the yard soon after, this burned-out hull was raised in late May and transported into the dry dock, where it would be converted into the Confederacy's first-ever ironclad, the CSS Virginia. Designed by Naval Lieutenants John M. Brooke and John L. Porter, the Virginia was similar in layout to a traditional wooden warship, with everything above the waterline being protected by massive iron plates. An iron ram was also added to the bow, making it unique compared to the designs in Europe. The downside of using all of this heavy metal, however, was that the Virginia had a draft of 22 feet, greatly limiting its navigational capability. The ship also took 9 months to create thanks to limited iron supplies and the aforementioned slow pace of southern industry. Still, Secretary Mallory had the fullest confidence that it was exactly what the Confederacy needed to break the Union blockade, and on February 17, 1862, the still unfinished Virginia was officially launched from Gosport. The Union response to the threat posed by the Virginia was immediate. The Lincoln administration established an Ironclad Board, and on August 7, 1861, Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles publicly offered a reward to anyone who could design ironclad steam vessels of war for the Union fleet. One of the men who stepped up to the challenge was a Swedish engineer named John Ericsson. His proposed design was far more radical than the one used for the Virginia, resembling a cheese box on a raft, according to contemporaries. About 40 different patented inventions were incorporated into the proposal, but the most noteworthy feature by far was the massive turret in the center of the hull. This turret would house two 11-inch Dahlgren guns and could be rotated to fire in any direction except directly forward. Yet despite these innovations, Ericsson's design was controversial, only being accepted when a handful of key members, including President Lincoln, advocated for it. The experimental vessel, now known as the USS Monitor, was launched on January 30, 1862, from the New York Naval Yard by an enthusiastic lieutenant named John L. Worden. Unlike the Virginia, however, the Monitor had to undergo sea trials before heading off to battle in order to assuage the anxieties of Ericsson's critics. On March 5th, the Monitor passed the last of these trials and immediately sailed toward Hampton Roads to confront the rebel Ironclad. The Battle of Hampton Roads began on March 8, 1862, when the Virginia left Gosport Naval Yard to attack a group of Federal ships anchored off Newport News, near the opening of the James River. The closest ones were the USS Cumberland and Congress, while the St. Lawrence, Minnesota, and Roanoke lay to the east. The Virginia's painfully slow speed of 5 knots meant that it had to be towed into the waters of Hampton Roads by the CSS Beaufort and Raleigh. The Virginia's captain, Flag Officer Franklin Buchanan, decided to make the Cumberland his first target, as it was the only one of the Union vessels that possessed enough armament to seriously damage the Ironclad. At around 1:30 p.m., the Virginia broke off its tow lines and headed straight for the Cumberland. As the slow-moving Confederate vessel approached, the Congress fired off a shot that bounced harmlessly off of the Virginia's thick iron plating. The rebel fleet would return the favor at 2:20 p.m., with the Virginia firing a broadside while the Beaufort provided supporting fire. Eventually, the Virginia managed to strike the Cumberland's starboard side with its iron ram, greatly damaging it, but also causing the ram to break off in the process. Drawing back, the Virginia then struck again, this time fatally. The sinking of the Cumberland would claim the lives of 121 Union sailors. The nearby Congress, upon witnessing the Cumberland's swift demise, intentionally ran itself aground to avoid being sunk. The Virginia and the now immobilized Congress would exchange fire for an hour before the battered crew of the Congress raised a white flag at roughly 4 p.m. While negotiating the terms of surrender for the crew, Captain Buchanan emerged onto the Virginia's upper deck and was shot by volley fire from Union troops on the shore. As a result, command of the ship passed to Lieutenant Catesby Ap R. Jones, though not before Buchanan ordered the Congress to be burned in retaliation. Meanwhile, the 3 Union frigates to the east attempted to relocate to a better position, but one of them, the USS Minnesota, also ran aground and was left vulnerable. Jones moved the Virginia to take advantage of the situation, but was unable to get anywhere within a mile of the ship due to the Virginia's low draft. With nightfall approaching and Buchanan still wounded, the Confederate fleet removed itself to the Elizabeth River while the Union fleet tried to dislodge Minnesota. When these efforts failed, the USS Monitor, having just arrived on scene, was tasked with protecting the crippled wooden vessel from the next day's assaults. On the morning of March 9th, Catesby Jones, now captain of the Virginia, set off to finish what he started. But as he gradually approached the seemingly unguarded Minnesota, the Monitor suddenly emerged from behind and intercepted the Virginia. The rebel supporting ships, being made of wood, fled as the 2 ironclads began circling each other. For 4 hours straight, the ships traded volleys, but neither would seriously damage the other's iron armor. At one point, the Virginia attempted to ram the Monitor, but it missed thanks to the latter's superior mobility. The Virginia did, however, manage to blind the Monitor's captain, John L. Worden, leading to the Union ironclad retreating to the shoals as command was handed over to Lieutenant Donna S. Green. Jones was eager to use this setback as a chance to strike at the temporarily undefended Minnesota, but the threat of falling tides forced the Virginia to withdraw to safety instead. The Monitor did not pursue, with Green arguing that he was under strict orders to defend the Minnesota until it could be removed. As the Virginia made its way back to Gosport, Union tugboats finally dislodged the Minnesota on March 10th. The Confederate fleet did not return that day, meaning the battle was effectively over. Never again would the CSS Virginia and USS Monitor confront each other on the open water. When the Battle of Hampton Roads ended, Both the Union and the Confederacy would claim victory, although many would argue that the actual result was a draw. The Union Navy, including the USS Monitor, had succeeded in protecting the Minnesota, but failed to save the Cumberland or the Congress. They also suffered far greater casualties than the rebel fleet, with 261 Federal sailors killed and 108 wounded in what would be the deadliest naval battle in American history until Pearl Harbor. The Confederate Navy, on the other hand, had demonstrated the potential lethality of the Ironclad, but the CSS Virginia's technical limitations prevented it from threatening the Union blockade on an existential level. What can be said for certain is that the brief engagement between the Virginia and Monitor perfectly highlighted the strengths and weaknesses of both Ironclad designs. The Virginia was cheaper to build and possessed more armaments, but it was also painfully slow and unable to travel in shallow waters due to its low draft. The Monitor, while having fewer guns and also suffering from teething technical issues, was much more nimble and capable of sailing to places where the Virginia would have run aground. Taken together, both ships left a profound impact on the navies of the world, proving to them the military potential of ironclads as well as signaling that the age of wooden sailing ships was coming to an end. Reflecting on this impact in 1937, future British Prime Minister Winston Churchill wrote that the Battle of Hampton Roads made the greatest change in the sea fighting since cannon fire by gunpowder had been mounted on ships about 400 years before.